Undercover boss orders toast, freezes when waitress says she can't afford her own breakfast. As dawn gently broke over the tree-lined street, John, powerful owner of a famous restaurant, chain-walked quietly like any ordinary passerby. Gone were the expensive suits and the gleaming luxury watch. Today, he wore an old, worn-out jacket and pulled a faded baseball cap low over his face. The man who once basked in the glow of dazzling lights and sat through grand boardroom meetings now hid behind a humble, simple appearance. John, 50 years old, born into poverty, had started his career from his own tiny kitchen. His beginnings were humblia, small eatery with only a few battered tables and chairs, but it held a grand dream: to build a workplace founded on kindness and fairness, where every meal warmed not just the stomachs of customers, but also the hearts of those behind the kitchen. But then, success came faster than he ever imagined. The Sunrise restaurant chain became a symbol of prosperity. And like so many stories before his, as the empire grew, John handed over the reins to a team of senior executives. The numbers in the financial reports looked better and better. Profits steadily increased. On paper, everything was perfect. Yet, his heart felt uneasy. Complaints began to surface more frequently. Anonymous letters from former employees, scattered online comments, even casual whispers he overheard at social gatherings. Everyone seemed to say, Sunrise just isn't the same anymore. And so, that morning, with a deep and unfamiliar sense of unease, John decided to do something he had long forgotten: return in person to the place that was once the heart of the brand he built. No announcements, no entourage, just a stranger with a longing to find the values he feared he had lost somewhere along his journey to the top. And John had no idea this quiet return would become the moment that changed his life forever. John quietly chose a familiar corner of the spot where he used to sit in the earliest days of his venture, back when every chair still smelled of fresh wood and every slice of toast was carefully prepared by his own hands. Today, he ordered nothing extravagant, just a simple plate of toast. The very meal he once proudly called the breakfast of happiness, because just a single bite could warm a person's entire day. But when the plain white porcelain plate was set before him, along with a steaming cup of coffee, John realized nothing was the same anymore. The young waitress, petite, her hair hastily tied, lowered her head in a quick, mechanical greeting and hurried away. Her smile was forced, as fragile as the morning mist that vanishes in the first light of day. But it was her weary, sorrowful eyes that struck John the hardest, an unspoken sadness that weighed heavier than any words could express. From the corner of the cafe, he quietly watched her. When she thought no one was paying attention, she slowly stood by the coffee counter, her thin shoulders slightly drooping as she let out a sigh so soft it seemed even her breath carried the weight of worry. Her voice rose, as fragile as a thread, yet it cut straight into John's ears, sharper than any formal warning. I don't even have enough money for breakfast. I guess I'll have to go hungry until the afternoon. Those words weren't meant for him, but they struck his heart with the chill of a bitter winter wind. John froze. The cup of coffee in his hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. His gaze fell to the plate of toast just served, a piece of bread, dry and over-toasted on one side, with a thin smear of butter that wasn't even enough to melt. The dish that he had once proudly introduced to every customer as a symbol of a warm beginning, now even the person who made it couldn't afford to enjoy a full meal. And at that very moment, John knew things were far worse than he had imagined. The glowing financial reports, full of impressive numbers, were nothing more than a curtain hiding a painful reality. Sunrise Diner hadn't just lost the quality of its meals, it had slowly lost the hearts of its people. In the following days, John didn't return to the office. There were no more lavish meetings, no more polished financial presentations. Instead, he chose to quietly return to the very place that had once been his greatest pride, Sunrise Diner. But this time, he didn't come to check the books. He came to listen to the unspoken sighs buried behind tired smiles. Early morning. John arrived when the light still flickered faintly and the smell of coffee hadn't yet filled the air. Staff members dragged their weary feet through the door, and the once friendly morning greetings had become nothing more than indifferent nods. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed harshly through the sluggish, exhausted atmosphere. Noon. The cafe was packed. From his hidden corner, John observed, plates of cold, dry toast were served with barely audible murmurs of, "Here you go." Coffee, thin as colored water, its meager foam vanishing in seconds, leaving only a bitter aftertaste. On the digital menu board, prices still stood proudly higher than even in the days of the cafe's golden years. Behind the counter, Gareth E. Branch, manager, stood with a monotonous, cold tone, his voice as flat and lifeless as the numbers on his financial reports. Cut the butter in half, reduce the jam portion. If anyone complains, just say per upper management's directive. Collect all tips into the internal fund, and don't let anyone question it. If someone doesn't like it, the door is always open. John felt as if the blood in his veins had turned to ice. The steady growth figures he had once believed in now flashed before his eyes like sharp knives cutting deep into his own sense of pride. And then, the moment that broke him came in the fading light of the late afternoon. Through the stained, dusty glass window, under the last weak rays of sunlight, John saw her again, the young waitress who had haunted his thoughts for days, sitting quietly in a small corner of the kitchen. In her hand was a piece of stale bread, and she slowly nibbled on it, trying to quell the gnawing hunger after a long, exhausting day. Beside her lay a crumpled overdue rent notice, the edges frayed and torn, the bold red overdue amount glaring like an open, unhealing wound. Her old, battered phone lit up with a cold, merciless notification. Power cutoff notice, effective tomorrow. Oh. And then, as if she had long grown accustomed to swallowing her tears, the girl stood up, straightened her faded apron, and bowed her head slightly, greeting customers with a fragile smile, a weak yet resilient smile, as if no matter how many storms life threw at her, she was determined to hold on to one last glimmer of hope. Never before had John felt such an overwhelming sense of failure. Those glowing growth charts and profit margins, suddenly, they seemed like thick velvet curtains, hiding a brutal reality that he, through his own neglect and blind trust, had allowed to fester for far too long. Sunrise Diner didn't lose its customers. It lost the very people who once poured their hearts and youth into this place with loyalty and love. And in that exact moment, standing in the fading light of day, John silently made a vow. I've let the fire here die out for far too long, but starting from this very moment, I will reignite the light this place truly deserves. The air was tense tight as a drawn bowstring. Employees stood silently in neat rows, their worried glances betraying their nervous anticipation. Rumors of an emergency meeting had spread like wildfire, but none had dared imagine that the man who would soon step through those doors would be the founder himself, John, walking in with his familiar, commanding presence, but this time with a new, unshakable resolve burning in his eyes. Today, he was no longer the silent man in a worn-out coat. He stood tall in a sharp gray suit, the polished name badge on his chest gleaming under the lights. John, CEO, founder, Sunrise Restaurant Group. The entire space fell into complete silence. Garethi branch manager stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale and bloodless. The young waitress, the very person who had consumed John's thoughts over the past day, stood quietly at the corner of the lobby, her eyes welling up with tears. But deep in those eyes was a faint glimmer of hope. John stepped forward. His voice rang out deep, warm, but resolute. Every word felt like a blade cutting through the suffocating atmosphere. Sunrise Diner was built with nothing but my bare hands and a single promise, that every breakfast here wouldn't just be fulfilling, but would feel as warm as a family gathering. But today, I have to face the harshest disappointment of all. I've let this place lose its way for far too long. He gestured toward the technical team. The massive LED screen lit up. Gary, calmly and shamelessly, accepting an envelope of cash from a supplier. Crates of cheap, low-quality ingredients being wheeled into the storage room. A chilling voice recording echoed clearly through the speakers. Cut the butter, reduce the jam, water down the coffee. Tips, collect everything into the internal fund. If anyone doesn't like it, let them leave. The entire hall held its breath. The air grew so thick you could feel the weight of every heartbeat pounding through the silence. John turned, his gaze sharp as a blade, cutting straight through Gary. Gary, do you have anything to say before I sign your termination right here and now? Gary's lips quivered, but not a single word came out. John calmly pulled a fountain pen from his pocket and with a decisive stroke, signed the termination letter. Cost-cutting should never come at the expense of human dignity. From this moment on, you are officially terminated. And to those who have enabled this moral decay, make your choice. Step out through those doors, or stay and begin again, with respect, kindness, and integrity. And 60. John walked straight down into the lobby, stopping before the small, fragile figure of the young waitress, the very person he had wondered about so many nights, asking himself, does she still have enough faith to stay? His voice softened, low and rich with emotion. Why didn't you leave this place sooner? She gave a faint, wistful smile. It trembled gently at the corners of her mouth, but in her eyes, In her eyes was an entire sky full of unwavering strength. Asterisk. Because I still believed that one day this place would be warm again, like a family breakfast everyone once dreamed of. Asterisk. John clasped her hand tightly and pulled a bank card from his pocket. Asterisk. There's $50,000 on this card. This isn't a gift, it's an apology. And more importantly, it's an investment in the courage you've held on to through the hardest of days. Asterisk. He turned around, his voice resonating powerfully through the hall. Asterisk. Starting today, I officially announce the Sunrise Reborn Reform Program. And She, the one who never lost faith in this place, will be the first to join the senior management training program. I hope that one day, not too far from now, she'll be standing right here, inspiring the next generation. Oh, a thunderous applause erupted, rolling through the hall like a grand symphony, heralding the dawn of a new era where light and compassion would be reignited. A true new day had begun. Amidst the applause, the entire hall seemed to brighten, as if washed clean by a long-awaited rain. And then, something unexpected happened. The room fell silent, holding its breath in anticipation. John slowly walked toward the temporary stage, where a beautifully adorned banner read, Sunrise Reborn. He gave a small nod, and immediately, golden ribbons were pulled away, unveiling a grand reform roadmap. Boldly printed across the top were the core values: respect, kindness, integrity. John held the bank card high. The lights reflected off the card's glossy surface, making it glimmer like a torch lighting the path of hope. Asterisk. This isn't just a number, it's an opportunity. And it's not just for her, it's for anyone who still wants to stay, who still believes in rebuilding a true home here at Sunrise. Asterisk. Suddenly, the young waitress with her old, worn apron still tied around her waist trembled as she stepped up onto the stage. Her eyes glistened with tears of happiness not yet fallen. She held the bank card close, as if cradling a beacon of light in her hands. Her voice rang out soft, but every word trembled with emotion. Asterisk. I once thought I was just a small, insignificant girl, unable to change anything in this world. But today, I finally understand, so long as you don't give up hope, even the tiniest spark can light up the darkest of spaces. Asterisk. Soft sobs echoed from the audience. An elderly employee, someone who had been with Sunrise since its earliest days, wiped away a tear. His frail hands began the first round of applause, and soon, the entire hall roared with the most heartfelt ovation it had ever known. John quietly stepped back toward the rear of the hall. His eyes followed the young woman now standing proudly on the stage. He took a deep breath and placed his hand gently against the large glass window of the upper floor, the very spot where he had once stood, alone and burdened by regret. This is the dawn I always dreamed of. And that dawn, at that very moment, was no longer just sunlight pouring through the glass windows. It radiated from the very people who were bravely starting over with the purest, most resilient hearts. Gone were the weary sighs. Gone were the silent, melancholic stares. Throughout the main hall, laughter and cheerful conversations rose like a joyful symphony of happiness. The scent of warm, freshly made pancakes mingled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee, filling the entire space like the fresh breath of a beautiful sunny day. At the center stage, beneath the brilliant banner reading Sunrise Reborn, the young waitress from days past now stood proudly in her formal uniform, a shimmering name badge gleaming on her chest: Emma Williams, Assistant General Manager. Her face no longer bore the shadows of hardship. It now glowed with pride. Her clear eyes looked out over the audience, where rows of new staff, young, full of ambition and belief, sat eagerly awaiting her words. Emma's voice rang out gentle but steady, like the morning light dispelling every shadow. Asterisk. There were days when I had only enough money for a dry piece of bread, sitting quietly in a dark corner of the kitchen. But even in those darkest days, I refused to let go of hope. And today, I stand here to tell you, hope is real. And when you hold on to it, the light will always find its way to you. Asterisk. The applause swelled like waves crashing onto the shore, rolling through the warm and vibrant space. On the rooftop, John stood silently by the large glass window, arms crossed over his chest, eyes quietly following the lively scene below. The morning breeze played gently through his silvered hair. The sweet scent of baked goods and rich coffee stirred memories of his earliest days, those unfinished dreams that now had been gloriously reborn. In that moment, he closed his eyes gently, a peaceful smile forming on his weathered face. And in a voice only he could hear, he made a quiet promise to himself. This is the dawn I always dreamed of. The applause still echoed, but the moment unfolding below hadn't yet reached its end. Emma took a deep breath. The stage lights reflected in her eyes, making them shine like a brilliant morning sky. She raised her hand toward a group of young employees seated in the front row and gave them a warm, encouraging smile. Asterisk, I'm not here to tell a sad story. I'm here to remind you that each and every one of you can write a new chapter for Sunrise, right here, right now. Asterisk. In the audience, a young waitress in a brand new apron couldn't hold back her tears. But this time, the tears weren't of sorrow. They were the tears that fall when, for the very first time, a new dream takes root in a young heart. Emma continued, her voice steady and unwavering, just like the journey she had walked through. Asterisk Sunrise Reborn is not just a name. It's a promise that none of us will ever have to start a new day on an empty stomach or carry the crushing weight of life's burdens alone. This will be the place where every person feels valued, not just by our customers, but by their teammates and by themselves. Asterisk, under the soft, warm lights, trays of fragrant pancakes were carried out, and steaming cups of rich coffee filled the air with their comforting aroma. Every gaze in the room now shimmered with radiant hope. Up on the rooftop, John still stood there, his eyes no longer distant, but warmer than ever. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying with it the pure, joyful laughter rising from the bustling hall below. For a brief moment, John saw his younger self again, the young man who once dreamed of building a sunrise where warmth and genuine smiles filled every corner. And in that very moment, as the grand clock chimed the top of the hour marking the official start of a new day, John nodded softly, his lips moving with a quiet, heartfelt whisper. Asterisk, it's no longer just a dream. At last, I'm seeing it come true. Asterisk, a brilliant dawn had truly returned, not merely through the sunlight outside, but through the light now glowing within hearts that once thought their hope had faded forever. Asterisk, you can build a magnificent empire, but if you forget the value of humanity, all of it will be nothing but a castle made of sand. A truly sustainable enterprise is not built on dry, lifeless numbers, but upon hearts that have been warmed, dreams that have been rekindled, and lives that have found happiness again because of you. Because after all is said and done, the greatest legacy you can ever leave behind is not a massive fortune, but the countless lives you've touched with kindness and compassion. Asterisk,